The bullet hit the dirt 3 inches from her knee, and she didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She didn't stop. Her hands were already moving, finding the rifle, checking the bolt, pressing her eye to the scope, while trained combat operators with years of experience lay flat against walls with their weapons useless and their mouths shut. Captain Reeves screamed her name. She didn't answer. 600 meters. Crosswind. Active fire. 1 breath. 1 trigger pull. The valley went absolutely silent. The sniper who had pinned down an entire special operations team was gone. And every man on that team turned and stared at their medic, the woman none of them had ever feared, like they were seeing her for the very first time. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay with me all the way to the end. You will not regret it. The briefing room smelled like stale coffee and dry erase marker, and Captain Daniel Reeves had already gone through the mission map 3 times before anyone said a word about the medic. It was Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb who brought it up. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, and said it the way men say things they believe are obvious casually without apology, like stating a fact of nature. "Carter's going to slow us down." Nobody disagreed out loud. A few eyes dropped to the table. A few others moved briefly to the far corner of the room where Olivia sat reviewing her trauma kit inventory, her head down, her hands moving through her supplies with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this particular task so many times it had become muscle memory. Captain Reeves looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at his map. "Carter keeps us alive," he said. "That's not slowing us down. That's the mission." Webb made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite argument. It landed somewhere in the middle, where a lot of things got buried in units like this: assumptions, doubts, quiet dismissals that never became direct enough to address. Olivia didn't look up. She had heard it before, not always those exact words, but the shape of them, the weight behind them. She had learned early in her career that the fastest way to end a conversation like that was to simply not participate in it. Not because she didn't have things to say, because she understood something that Webb didn't, that the people who underestimated her were in almost every case handing her an advantage she hadn't even asked for. She zipped her kit closed and moved her attention to the mission briefing. The target was a remote valley in Kunar province. Eastern Afghanistan, where the mountains pressed in close from every direction, and the terrain made satellite imagery almost useless, because half of what looked like open ground from the air was actually a broken maze of ridgelines, dry creek beds, and abandoned structures that could hide a dozen fighting positions and look like nothing at all on a screen. A Defense Intelligence Agency officer named Colonel Raymond Fisk had gone missing during a reconnaissance insertion 4 days earlier. His GPS tracker had gone dark 18 hours after insertion. His communications had stopped completely 48 hours after that. There had been one report from a local source, unverified, fragmentary, suggesting Fisk had made contact with a local asset network in a village called Taraki, but after that, nothing. The unit's job was to find him. Simple on paper. Nothing in that valley was simple. "We move in fast," Reeves said, tapping the map. "We do not establish a perimeter. We do not make contact with locals unless absolutely necessary. We find Fisk, we bring him home. Any questions?" There were none. Reeves looked around the room once, letting his eyes move across each face: the shooters, the communications specialist, the intelligence liaison, and then briefly, almost as an afterthought, to Olivia. "Carter," he said, "you stay close. Your job is keeping us breathing. Leave the fighting to the fighters." Olivia met his eyes. "Yes, sir," she said. She said it the way she always said it, even. Calm, without a single ripple on the surface. What she didn't say was everything else. She had started keeping her history to herself during her 2nd year in the Army, after she'd realized that the moment she told people what she'd done before the medical program, the dynamic shifted in ways that were never simple and never entirely good. People either stopped trusting her as a medic, as if her competence in one area somehow contaminated another, or they started treating her like something unusual, something to be displayed, something that existed to satisfy their curiosity rather than to function as part of a team. Neither outcome helped anyone. So she stopped volunteering the information. She let them see what she needed them to see. She had grown up in rural Montana in a place where the distance between neighbors was measured in miles rather than feet, where the winters were long and the summers short, and the wind came down off the mountains with a particular kind of violence that Olivia had always found clarifying rather than frightening. Her father had been a rancher and a hunter, a quiet man with calloused hands and patient eyes who believed that the most important skill a person could develop was the ability to wait without fidgeting. Her mother had been a registered nurse who worked a 60-mile radius out of the back of a truck and could diagnose a broken arm or a turned ankle or a case of pneumonia while standing in someone's doorway in the middle of a blizzard. Olivia had inherited both of them equally. From her father, she had learned to be still, to read terrain, to understand the relationship between distance and wind and angle and time. She had been shooting seriously since she was 8 years old, and by the time she was 15, she could put 3 rounds inside a quarter at 300 yards. From her mother, she had learned that staying alive was sometimes more complicated than simply not getting shot. That a body was a system. That when something went wrong in one part, it affected everything else. That the person who understood those connections, who could think clearly when everyone else was in shock, was often the person who decided whether someone lived or died. She had been recruited into an Army Marksmanship Development Program at 19. 2 years of training competition evaluation. She had been extraordinary at it. Not just competent extraordinary. The kind of shooter that instructors cited as examples to other shooters. The kind that program coordinators talked about in terms of long-range futures and special assignments. And then she had watched a soldier die from a wound that should have been survivable. Not in combat. In training. A freak accident, a piece of shrapnel, a medic who was too far away and didn't arrive in time. 37 seconds. That was the margin. The post-incident analysis had found that 37 additional seconds of treatment would in all probability have changed the outcome. 37 seconds. Olivia had done the math in her head for weeks afterward. Distance response time positioning. She had thought about it during sleep, and during meals, and during training sessions, and what she kept arriving at was not anger or grief, though she felt both, but a kind of cold, clarifying certainty. She knew how to take a life at 800 meters. She did not yet know how to save one. She put in for a transfer to the combat medical program 6 weeks later. She had been with Reeves's unit for 14 months. In that time, she had treated 11 serious injuries in the field, 2 of which would have been fatal without immediate intervention. She had earned the trust of every person on the team in exactly the way she intended to earn it, not by performing, not by impressing, but by being exactly where she said she would be, doing exactly what she said she could do without failure and without drama. They trusted her completely. They simply didn't see all of her. The morning they deployed into the Kunar Valley was cold and overcast, and the helicopters dropped them 2 kilometers from Taraki because the closer landing zones were considered too exposed. They moved on foot in a staggered column. Reeves at the front. Olivia positioned third from the rear with the communications specialist, Corporal Yusuf Okafor, directly behind her. Okafor was 23 years old and from Houston, and he had a habit of humming under his breath when he was nervous that Olivia had noticed within her first week with the unit. He was humming now. "You good?" she asked quietly. "Good," he said. Then, "It's quiet." "Yeah." Too quiet. She didn't answer that one. Not because she didn't have an opinion, but because saying yes out loud didn't change the operational requirement. They still had to move forward. Acknowledging the threat didn't reduce it. They moved for 40 minutes without incident. Then they entered the village. Taraki was a collection of maybe 20 structures spread along the base of a ridgeline, connected by narrow lanes barely wide enough for 2 people to pass each other. Several of the buildings had sustained significant damage, collapsed walls, burned-out roofs, the particular kind of destruction that suggested the village had been fought over more than once and had never fully recovered from any of it. It looked abandoned. Reeves held up a fist. The column stopped. He stood there for a moment, reading the space in front of him, the way experienced combat leaders do not, looking for specific threats, but processing the entire environment at once. The stillness of it, the quality of the silence, the absence of small things that should have been present if the village was genuinely unoccupied. Birds, wind movement, the smell of dust settling undisturbed. "Something's wrong," he said quietly. Those were the last words before everything broke. The shot came from high ground. Northeast ridgeline. Olivia's mind registered it in fragments direction elevation angle before she even fully understood what she was hearing. But she understood what it meant when Sergeant Ethan Brooks staggered and went down. "Sniper northeast ridge. Everybody down." The team exploded into motion. They pressed to walls dove behind rubble scattered into doorways. The second shot hit the ground 6 inches from where Webb had been standing half a second earlier, and the third clipped the corner of a mud brick wall above Reeves's head and sent fragments raining down on him. And Ethan Brooks was on the ground in the open. Olivia was moving before she consciously decided to move. That was the thing about 14 months of combat medicine. The decision-making process became pre-verbal. She wasn't calculating risk or weighing options. Her body simply understood that a person was down, and she was the person who went to them. "Partouche or don't." Reeves's voice cut off because she was already across the open ground, already sliding into the space beside Ethan, already running her hands over him in the rapid, systematic assessment that she had practiced 10,000 times in training and executed with terrifying efficiency when it actually mattered. Entry wound right shoulder, high. The clavicle was involved, she could feel it through the tissue. Significant blood loss already beginning. No exit wound, which meant the round was still in there, which meant internal involvement was a possibility she had to account for. "Brooks, talk to me. Ethan?" He made a sound. Not words, but a sound. "I've got you," she said. Not reassurance. Statement of fact. She had the wound packed before the fourth shot hit the building above her. "Mabtad. Doc, you need to get out of there." Webb's voice from somewhere to her left. "Working," she called back. "The sniper has that position zeroed. I know that, Marcus." She did know it. She also knew that Ethan Brooks was going to bleed out if she left him where he was, and she was not going to leave him where he was. She got her hands under his arms and started moving him backward toward the nearest cover, a collapsed wall section that offered maybe 2 feet of height, but put solid material between them and the ridgeline. It took 40 seconds. It felt like an hour. She got him behind the wall and went back to work. "Carter." Reeves's voice now controlled but urgent. He had worked his way around the edge of the building to a position maybe 10 feet from her. "Sit rep on Brooks. He's stable for now. Round is still in. I've controlled the external bleeding. He needs surgery within the hour if we want to keep the arm, but he's not going to die in the next 10 minutes. Can he move? Not on his own." Reeves pressed back against the wall as another round struck above him. His jaw tightened. "We have a problem," he said. "The sniper has the entire approach to our extraction route covered. Every time we try to move, he adjusts. He knows the terrain better than we do. Where's our air support?" 40 minutes out. Weather's degraded the response window. Olivia processed that. 40 minutes was a long time when someone on a ridgeline could see every position you moved to. "Can we suppress him?" "We've tried. The angle's wrong and the range is too long for the weapons we've got down here." He stopped. Then, "We need our marksman." "But our marksman is lying right next to you." Olivia looked at Ethan. He was semi-conscious, his face pale, his breathing shallow but regular. He had been moved as far from the fight as his condition and their position allowed. Then she looked at his rifle. It was lying where it had fallen when he went down. She had dragged it with him out of reflex, without really thinking about it, the same way she would have secured any piece of critical equipment. It was a precision, long-range platform with a quality scope and a round chambered. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at Reeves. "Give me a target reference," she said. Reeves stared at her. "What? The sniper position. Give me a reference point. The silence between them lasted maybe 2 heartbeats. Then Reeves said, with the flatness of someone suppressing a strong reaction, "Carter, you're a medic." "I am," she said. "I'm also asking you for a target reference." "This isn't the time for, Captain." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "We have 40 minutes until air support. We have a man down who needs evacuation. We have a sniper who controls every possible route. You do not have another option that you haven't already tried. So I am going to ask you one more time. Give me a target reference." Webb's voice came from somewhere behind Reeves. "Sir, she's right that we don't have another option. She's a combat medic, Webb. She's also the only one suggesting something other than waiting to get shot." Another round hit the wall directly above Olivia's position. The sound of it was specific, high-sharp, the particular crack of a precision round at extended range, and she noted automatically the time between the hit and the report, which gave her a rough distance estimate that aligned with the ridgeline Reeves had indicated. "Northeast ridge," she said. "Approximately how far?" Reeves looked at her. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not agreement, not approval, but the grudging logic of a man who was running out of workable alternatives. "Estimate 600 meters. There's a structure up there, looks like an old observation post. He's firing from the right-hand window on the 2nd level." Olivia picked up the rifle. The entire team went quiet. Not just quiet, still. The kind of stillness that happens when people suddenly understand they are watching something they did not expect to see. She moved through the weapons check with a practiced efficiency that was in itself a form of communication. Checking the bolt, the chamber, the magazine, seating the scope adjustment. Each movement exact and unhurried, the hands of someone who knew where everything was supposed to be, because they had been there before, many times in circumstances not entirely unlike this one. Webb said from behind Reeves, "What the—" Reeves put a hand out to quiet him. Olivia settled into position. The problem with the shooting position was the terrain. She had maybe a sliver of workable angle. The collapsed wall gave her cover, but also limited her sight lines, and she was going to have to expose a portion of herself to get the necessary elevation on the ridgeline. She worked through it methodically, adjusting her body, using the available cover to minimize her exposure while maximizing her angle. "Wind," she said. Reeves, to his credit, answered without arguing. "Left to right, light, maybe 5 miles per hour at this elevation." She incorporated that. 600 meters. Light crosswind, left to right. The scope adjustment she needed. She dialed it. Okafor's voice very quiet from somewhere behind her. "Is she seriously about to—" Nobody answered him. So, this was the thing about long-range precision shooting that people who had never done it consistently failed to understand. It was not about the shot. The shot was in some ways the simplest part. What it was actually about was the entire process that preceded the shot, the reading, the calculation, the stillness, the absolute subordination of everything reactive and impulsive in favor of a deliberate, methodical clarity. Olivia's heart rate was elevated. She was aware of that. She was also aware that elevated heart rate was a condition to be managed, not a reason to stop. She had learned that lesson early. The first time she had shot under pressure, her instructor had told her that the goal was not to eliminate anxiety. The goal was to perform precisely in spite of it. She breathed, in, out, the way she had learned to breathe, the way she still practiced. She found the window, 2nd level right side. The structure was partially obscured by terrain feature, but the window itself was visible, a dark rectangle against a lighter surface. No movement. The sniper was disciplined. He had chosen his position well. He wasn't showing himself between shots. She waited. Another round came down, hitting 20 meters to her left. Someone yelled. She didn't move. "Carter," Reeves started. "Still," she said quietly. She meant herself. She also meant him. The second shot was the tell she needed. The timing of it, the angle, the minor adjustment in position the sniper had made, she saw the barrel move just briefly before it withdrew again. She knew where he was now. She exhaled slowly. She waited for the space between heartbeats. She fired. The valley went silent. Not the silence of before, the tense waiting silence that had stretched over the whole approach. A different silence. The specific silence of something having ended. Nobody moved for a full 3 seconds. Then Reeves said very quietly, "Did you?" "He won't fire again," Olivia said. She pulled back from the position and moved immediately back to Ethan, settling beside him, checking his vitals. Pulse, respiration, the wound packing with the same focused attention she had brought to the rifle 30 seconds earlier. Reeves came around the corner and stood over her. She could feel him looking at her. She didn't look up. "Carter?" His pressures dropped a little, but his airways clear. "We need to move him to the extraction point as soon as you're confident the ridgeline is clear." "Carter." She looked up. He was staring at her with an expression she had seen on people's faces before in moments like this. Not quite shock, not quite anger, not quite admiration, but some complicated thing that contained elements of all three, and hadn't yet resolved itself into anything nameable. "Who are you?" he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to Ethan and pressed 2 fingers against his wrist to read his pulse. "I'm your medic," she said. "And right now, my patient needs to move. Are we moving, Captain?" He stood there another moment. Then, "We're moving." Webb appeared beside Reeves. He was looking at Olivia with an expression that was harder to read than Reeves's. There was something working behind his eyes, some private accounting happening that she couldn't quite access. He said nothing. But he helped carry Ethan to the extraction point without being asked. The radio crackled to life 20 minutes later. Air support confirmation, adjusted timeline 30 minutes out. Okafor was relaying position coordinates when he stopped, lowered the handset and looked at Olivia. "Doc," he said. "Yeah." "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." He took a moment. "Have you done that before?" She was checking the wound packing again, monitoring Ethan's breathing, tracking his color. She didn't stop doing any of those things. "Done what?" she said. He paused. "I'm just asking." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said without looking up, "My job is making sure everyone on this team goes home, whatever that takes." Okafor sat with that. "Yeah," he finally said. "Okay. You doing all right?" "I'm fine. I'm good." He paused. "Shaken, but good." "That's the appropriate response," she said. He almost laughed. Almost. From the other side of the position, they could hear Reeves talking to Webb in a low, controlled voice. She couldn't make out the words, but she recognized the cadence, the kind of conversation where someone is trying to get information and the other person is carefully deciding how much to give. She knew they were talking about her. She knew this wasn't over. She also knew that Ethan's pulse was steadying, that his respiration was regular, that the bleeding had stayed controlled, and that 30 minutes was a manageable interval if nothing else changed. She had done what needed to be done. That was all she had ever set out to do. Somewhere out on the ridgeline, the valley was quiet. Not the dangerous quiet of before. Something settled in it. Now, a stillness that felt earned rather than threatening. Olivia sat beside her patient and kept her hands on him because that was her job, and because her job was the thing she had chosen deliberately over every other thing she might have been. The helicopters were coming. Ethan was going to make it. Everything else could wait. The helicopter didn't wait for anyone to finish their thoughts. It came in hard and fast, the rotors beating the cold air into submission, and the moment it touched down, the team moved with the disciplined urgency of people who had learned through experience that the window between insertion and exposure was never as long as you wanted it to be. 2 of the operators loaded Ethan onto the litter. Okafor secured the communications equipment. Webb checked the perimeter with the focused expression of a man who was doing his job and simultaneously doing something else entirely, processing, recalculating, rearranging everything he thought he knew into a new configuration that didn't quite fit yet. Reeves was the last one to board. He stood at the edge of the landing zone for a moment longer than necessary, and Olivia watched him from inside the aircraft. Watched him turn and look back toward the ridgeline, toward the observation post, toward the window where the sniper had been, and she saw the moment it fully landed on him. Not the tactical reality of what had happened, the personal one. He had told her to leave the fighting to the fighters. He climbed in and didn't look at her. She turned back to Ethan and kept her hands on him all the way home. The debrief happened 4 hours after they landed. That was fast. Normally, the post-mission review was scheduled for the following morning, allowing the team time to clean up, decompress from the particular kind of psychological pressure that combat operations imposed. The accelerated timeline told Olivia everything she needed to know about how urgently certain people wanted certain questions answered. She had cleaned her hands, changed her shirt, eaten half a protein bar and abandoned the other half, and was sitting in the debrief room when Reeves came in with Major Sandra Hollis from the battalion intelligence section. Hollis was a compact woman with sharp eyes and the particular kind of stillness that came from spending years in intelligence work, the habit of revealing nothing while absorbing everything. She set a folder on the table, sat down across from Olivia, and opened it without preamble. "Staff Sergeant Carter," she said. "Walk me through what happened at the observation post engagement." Olivia walked her through it. Clean, sequential, factual. She did not embellish and she did not minimize. She described the shot the same way she would have described a medical procedure in terms of the problem, the assessment, and the intervention. When she finished, Hollis looked at the folder for a moment. Then she looked up. "What program were you in?" Olivia held her gaze. "Ma'am, before the medical MOS. You didn't learn to shoot like that in basic. What program?" The room was quiet. Reeves was standing against the wall with his arms crossed, and she could feel the weight of his attention without looking at him. "Advanced Marksmanship Development," she said. 2 years. I was 20 when I transferred to medical training." Hollis wrote something. "Your record shows a clean transfer. No disciplinary issues, no performance concerns. Voluntary." "Yes, ma'am." "Why, personal reasons." "Personal reasons," Hollis repeated in the tone of someone who worked in intelligence and had a very specific relationship with the concept of personal reasons. "Yes, ma'am." Hollis looked at her for another moment. Then she closed the folder. "We'll need a formal statement about the engagement. Other than that, you're released." She paused. "Good work today, Sergeant." Reeves followed Olivia out of the room. She heard his footsteps behind her in the corridor and didn't slow down. "Carter." She stopped. She turned. He was standing 5 feet from her with the expression of a man who had been rehearsing a conversation and had abruptly realized that none of the versions he'd prepared were going to be adequate. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. "Tell you what, sir? You know what." She considered the question seriously. Not the tactical version of it. Not the operational argument about whether a medic with precision shooting skills was an asset or a liability. The real version. The one behind his eyes. "Because it wasn't relevant," she said. "It was relevant today. Today it became relevant. Before today it wasn't." "Carter." "Sir?" She kept her voice even. "You brought me on this team to keep people alive. That's what I've done for 14 months. That's what I did today. The method was different. The objective was the same." He looked at her for a long moment. "I put you in the wrong category," he said. It came out quieter than he probably intended. "Most people do." "That bothers you?" "Not as much as you might think." He took a breath. "Why not?" She thought about her father standing in an open field in early morning, teaching her that the most important part of waiting was not the waiting itself, but the certainty you carried while you did it. She thought about her mother driving through a blizzard, because someone needed her, and distance was not a reason to fail them. "Because what I know about myself doesn't change based on what other people see," she said. "And because being underestimated has never once stopped me from doing what needed to be done." Reeves looked at the floor, then back at her. "Brooks is in surgery," he said. "I know." "Surgeon said the next 30 minutes will determine the arm." "The packing held," she said. "That's all I could control." It was more than that, and you know it. She didn't argue with him. She also didn't accept the compliment in any particular way. She simply stood there and let it exist between them, without making anything more of it than it was. "Get some rest," he said finally. "After I check on Ethan." He almost said something about that. She could see it forming. He stopped himself. "After you check on Ethan," he said. She nodded and walked down the corridor. The surgical ward was 3 buildings over, and Olivia sat outside it for 2 hours in a plastic chair that had never once in its operational life been described as comfortable. She had a cup of cold coffee and her own thoughts for company, which was fine. She was used to her own thoughts. They had always been reliable. Okafor found her there at hour 90 minutes. He came around the corner, saw her, and sat down in the chair beside hers without asking permission or making any announcement about his intentions. He had a bottle of water and offered it to her. She shook her head. "How you doing?" he said. "Fine." "That's what you always say." "Because it's always true." "Not sure it's always true," he said, "but I'm also not going to argue with you about it." She almost smiled at that. They sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "Webb was asking questions." "About what?" "About you, your record, what you were doing before the unit." He paused. He was pretty worked up. Marcus is always worked up. This was different. Okafor turned his water bottle in his hands. He wasn't just curious, he was, I don't know, it felt like something was bothering him and he was trying to find a way to make it your problem instead of his. Olivia understood exactly what he was describing. She had encountered it before. There was a particular kind of discomfort that some people experienced when the evidence contradicted the story they'd built about the world, about who was capable of what, about who deserved which kind of trust. When the evidence was strong enough, they had 2 options: revise the story or attack the evidence. "Webb doesn't like being wrong," she said. "No. He'll figure it out. You have a lot of faith in people." "I have a lot of experience with people," she said. "Which is a different thing, but it leads to the same conclusion most of the time." Okafor was quiet for a moment. "What conclusion is that?" "That most people, if you give them enough time and enough evidence, eventually land where they should have been to begin with. And the ones who don't." She looked at the door of the surgical ward. "They're not my problem," she said. "My problem is in that room." As if on cue, the door opened, and a surgical nurse stepped out, saw Olivia, and said, "He's out of surgery, stable. They saved the arm." Olivia exhaled once slowly, the way she exhaled after a long shot when everything had gone right. "Thank you," she said. The nurse went back inside. Okafor looked at her sideways. "You going to be able to sleep now?" "Probably not," she said. "But that's not new." What was new was what happened the next morning. She found out from Reeves, who told her at 0600, with the particular controlled expression of a man delivering information he had not yet decided how to feel about. Colonel Raymond Fisk, the intelligence officer they had gone into the valley to find, had been recovered by a separate unit operating in an adjacent sector. Not in Taraki. Not in the valley at all. He had made it nearly 12 kilometers on foot after his initial extraction failed, had been sheltered by a local family for 72 hours, and had been found coherent dehydrated and considerably thinner than his last photograph, but functionally intact, which meant the mission had not been what any of them thought it was. The intelligence placing him in Taraki was flawed, Reeves said. Flawed how? That's above our pay grade to assess right now. He paused. What I can tell you is that the enemy positions in Taraki were prepared. The setup, the timing, the coverage pattern the sniper was using, the way they waited until we were fully committed before engaging. He stopped. Someone knew we were coming. The words settled over her like cold water. You're saying it was deliberate? I'm saying it has the characteristics of a deliberate operation. Whether that means compromised intelligence, compromised communications, or something else, that analysis is happening right now at a level above this unit. She thought through the implications systematically, the way she thought through everything. The engagement in the valley hadn't been a chance contact. The trap had been set specifically for them, which meant someone had known the mission timeline, the insertion point, the unit composition. "Webb," she said. Reeves went still. "Not an accusation," she said quickly. "He was asking questions last night. About me. About the team." "I know. Is that routine or—" "Carter," he stopped her. "There's an investigation underway. I need you to understand that certain things are going to happen over the next few days that may look unusual. If anyone comes to you with questions that aren't coming from me or from Hollis, you route them directly to me. Understood?" She looked at him carefully. "Understood. This is not the time to be forthright with everyone who expresses curiosity. When is it ever?" He almost smiled at that. "Almost. Get some breakfast," he said. "The day's going to be long." She was on her second cup of coffee in the mess when Webb sat down across from her. He set his tray down with a deliberateness that said the choice of seat had been intentional, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who had decided something during the night and was now executing on that decision. "Morning," she said. "Morning." He poured hot sauce onto his eggs with focused attention. "Heard Fisk was recovered." "Yeah. Good news." "It is." He ate in silence for a moment. Then, "I owe you an apology." She looked up. Webb was not looking at her directly. His eyes were on his food, and there was something in the set of his jaw that suggested this cost him more than the words themselves conveyed, that the words were the easy part, and what was hard was the private accounting that had made them necessary. "For the comment before the mission," he said, "that you'd slow us down. You believed it when you said it. That doesn't make it right." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." "I filed you in a box," he said. "Put a label on it. Didn't look any further than that." She watched him. "I've done that to a lot of people," he said. "And I've been wrong enough times that I should know better by now." He finally looked up. "You saved the mission yesterday. Not just Brooks, the mission, all of us. And I want to say that directly." Olivia held his gaze. "I appreciate that, Marcus," she said. Something in his expression shifted the use of his first name she thought landing differently than he expected. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "Why medicine? After what you could do with a rifle, why didn't you stay in the program?" The question was genuine. She could hear it in the way it came out, not probing, not trying to access something she hadn't offered. Just genuine. She thought about how much to say, and then decided on honesty, because he had given her some, and it seemed like the appropriate exchange. "I watched someone die," she said, "from a wound that should have been survivable. And I realized I was spending all my time learning how to end things when what I actually wanted was to know how to keep them going." Webb was quiet for a moment. "That's—" He stopped, started again. "That's not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect? Something about duty, or service, or following orders?" "It was none of those things," she said. "It was personal." He nodded slowly. "Does it do you ever miss it? The marksmanship work?" She thought about the moment in the valley settling behind the rifle, the particular clarity of that process, the way everything unnecessary fell away, and what remained was simple and clean and exact. "Sometimes," she said, "but I've never once regretted the choice." Webb nodded again. They finished their coffee in a silence that was for the first time since she had known him comfortable. Chig. The investigation moved quickly. Military investigations always did when the stakes were high enough, and the people running them were motivated enough, and the evidence was specific enough to give them traction. Olivia was interviewed twice more, once by Hollis, and once by a two-man team from the Criminal Investigation Division, whose name she wasn't given and didn't ask for. Both times, she told the truth. All of it in sequence, without editorializing. Both times, the investigators wrote things down and left without telling her anything in return. That was fine. She wasn't doing it for the information exchange. On the third day after the mission, Reeves called her into his office. It was a small room. It was always a small room in units like this, with a desk and 2 chairs and a whiteboard on the wall that currently had nothing written on it. He was standing when she came in, which meant he wanted to say whatever he was about to say from a position that felt less formal than sitting, which in turn meant it was either better or worse than she expected. "The investigation has a preliminary finding," he said. "The compromise. Source in the intelligence chain, not in this unit." He watched her face carefully as he said it. "Not Webb." She exhaled slowly. "They're being thorough," he said. "It'll take more time for the full picture, but the bottom line for us is that the unit is clean." "Good. There's something else." He moved around behind his desk, which told her the formal part was coming. "Higher Command has reviewed the after-action report, including the section on the sniper engagement." She waited. "There's a recommendation coming through," he said, "for a commendation, for actions in contact above and beyond your designated role." "I was doing my job." "Your job is medical treatment under fire," he said. "What you did goes significantly beyond that designation." "The designation is a formality," she said. "The job is getting everyone home." "Carter." He sat down. "I need to ask you directly about something, and I need you to answer me directly." "All right." "The shot in the valley. 600 meters crosswind under active fire in a position you had 30 seconds to establish." He looked at her steadily. What was the probability of that shot going where it went? She understood what he was actually asking. Not the mechanics. The honesty. "High," she said. "That was not a lucky shot, sir. I knew what I was doing." He nodded, like something had been confirmed. "I've been thinking about how I run this unit," he said. "Specifically about what I told you before the mission. Leave the fighting to the fighters." He let that sit between them for a moment. "I was wrong about the categories." "You weren't wrong that I'm a medic." "No. But I was wrong about what a medic is." He folded his hands on the desk. "I put you in a role, and I looked at the label, and I stopped looking. I never once asked what else you carried." "Most commanders don't." "Is that an excuse?" "No," she said. "It's an observation." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, she could hear the sounds of the unit moving through its morning footsteps, voices the distant clatter of equipment. "I'm restructuring how we run training assessments," he said. "I want a full skills inventory for every person on this team, not just their designated MOS, everything they know that's relevant to what we do." She looked at him. "You should know what your people can do," she said. "All of it." "Yeah," he said. "I should." He stood up and extended his hand across the desk. She shook it. It was a simple gesture. But the weight behind it was not simple at all. It was the acknowledgement of something that had shifted fundamentally, the recognition of a wrong assumption formally corrected by the person who had held it. She walked out of his office and back into the corridor, and the morning sounds of the unit resumed around her, ordinary and immediate and real. Ethan was out of the medical ward and already arguing with the surgeon about his recovery timeline, which Olivia knew because she had been his primary contact, and the surgeon had called her in mild exasperation to ask if this was normal behavior. She had told him, yes, it was extremely normal, and that he should hold firm on the 6-week restriction because Ethan would accept 4 weeks if pressed hard enough, but would cheat on 3. The surgeon had thanked her. She had almost laughed. Life in the unit was resuming its ordinary rhythms, and within those rhythms, something had permanently changed. Not loudly, not through any formal announcement, but in the way that real changes happen between people who worked closely together, gradually, and then all at once like a bone that has been quietly healing. Until one morning the person wakes up and realizes they can bear weight on it again. The commendation paperwork would come through in its own time. Reeves would restructure his assessments. Webb would keep eating breakfast across from her sometimes, and the conversations would be different now. Not easier necessarily, but more honest, which was better. Okafor would keep humming when he was nervous, and she would keep noticing, and that small, ordinary thing would continue to be the thing that reminded her she was part of something, not just a function, not just a designation, but a team of people who were in their particular and imperfect way responsible for each other. And underneath all of it, underneath the reports and the recovery and the restructuring, and the slowly recalibrating assumptions of the people around her, something else was working. Something that had been set in motion by the shot in the valley and the investigation that followed. Something that none of them knew about yet. Something that had to do with Colonel Raymond Fisk and what he had actually been doing in that valley, and why the intelligence that sent them there had been wrong in a way that was very specifically and very carefully wrong. The full picture was still forming, but the first pieces were already in place. And Olivia Carter, who was very good at waiting, was watching all of them. Colonel Raymond Fisk was not a man who frightened easily. That was the thing Olivia noticed first when she finally saw him in person. Not his physical condition, which was rough. Not his demeanor, which was guarded, but the specific quality of his composure. He had spent 72 hours sheltered by strangers in a hostile environment, had walked nearly 12 kilometers on a bad ankle through terrain that would have broken most people, and he had arrived at the forward operating base with the bearing of a man who had been inconvenienced rather than destroyed. That kind of stillness didn't come from nothing. It came from knowing something. She hadn't expected to meet him. Her involvement in the Taraki mission was officially complete. The after-action reports were filed. The investigation was ongoing, at levels above her clearance, and her daily function had returned to what it always was. Maintaining the medical readiness of the unit, treating the minor injuries and infections and stress-related symptoms that accumulated in any group of people living at operational tempo for extended periods. It was Reeves who brought her in. He came to her workspace on the 5th day after the mission, stood in the doorway for a moment, the way he sometimes did when he was thinking through the best approach to something, and then said, "Fisk wants to talk to you." She set down the supply inventory she was working through. "Me specifically. You specifically." "Why?" "He didn't say. He asked for you by name." She thought about that for a moment. Fisk had been in the valley. He had been missing when they went in. He had no direct knowledge of what had happened during the mission, because he hadn't been there, but he had apparently been briefed on the after-action report, and something in that report had made him want to speak to her directly. "When?" she said. "Now if you're willing." She was willing. Fisk was in one of the private briefing rooms, which were private only in the sense that they had a door that closed and walls that reached the ceiling. He was sitting on the edge of the table rather than in a chair, arms crossed, and when she came in, he looked at her with the direct evaluating attention of someone conducting an assessment and not particularly concerned about concealing that fact. She returned the look without flinching. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said. "Colonel Fisk." He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. He stayed on the table. "I read the after-action," he said. "Specifically the section on the engagement at the observation post." "Yes, sir." 600 meters crosswind, unstable firing position under active fire. He tilted his head slightly. "And before that you dragged your wounded teammate across open ground with the sniper actively targeting that area. He needed treatment. He could have bled out if you hadn't reached him when you did." "Yes." "And then you neutralized the sniper." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone with nothing to say. The silence of someone deciding how much of what they had to say they were going to commit to. "How much do you know about what I was doing in the valley?" he said. "My understanding was that you were on a reconnaissance mission and your extraction failed." "That's the official version." She looked at him steadily. "What's the unofficial version?" she said. Another pause. He unfolded his arms and set his hands on his knees. "I was not conducting a reconnaissance mission," he said. "I was meeting a source, a long-term asset who had been in place for 3 years and who had, in the 2 months preceding my insertion, provided information that triggered 4 separate operations, all of which were successful. He stopped. In the week before our meeting, this source told me something that required direct verification, something I didn't want traveling through the normal intelligence channels. Olivia kept her expression neutral. What did they tell you? That there was a compromise in the intelligence network serving this sector. That mission parameters were being accessed by someone inside the system, and that information was being routed to a specific enemy coordination cell. He held her gaze. The mission to Taraki, your mission, was not a response to flawed intelligence. The false intelligence was created deliberately, to send your unit into a prepared ambush. The room was quiet. She felt the full weight of what he'd just said settle over her. Not panic, not shock exactly, but the cold, specific gravity of a reality rearranging itself into a more dangerous shape than she'd previously understood. You're saying the target was our unit, she said. I'm saying the target was specific members of your unit, he said. Or possibly specific intelligence that a member of your unit was believed to carry. Who? That's what I've been trying to determine. He stood up from the table and moved to the window, not looking out of it, just positioning himself differently the way people did when they were working through something complicated and needed their body to do something while their mind processed. The source who warned me is now dead. Killed 48 hours after our meeting. That's why I was on foot in the valley for 3 days. I was trying to get out without using any of the compromised communication channels. And the investigation found what it was pointed toward, he said, which is not necessarily the same as the whole picture. He looked at her directly. Carter, what I'm about to tell you is not in any report, and cannot be in any report until I know who I can trust with it. She understood the weight of that. She also understood that he was telling her specifically for a reason. I'm listening, she said. The sniper in the observation post, he said. He wasn't a local fighter. The weapon recovered from that position. Your shot was accurate enough to leave the weapon intact and recoverable. The weapon was a specific model, an SVD variant that has never been in the local weapons supply chain. It was brought in from outside the region, outside the country. He watched her face. The sniper was a professional, someone hired specifically for this operation, someone with enough precision to hold down a 6-person special operations team from a single position. He paused. And you killed him. She felt something shift behind her sternum. Not pride. Something more uncomfortable than that. At 600 meters, Fisk said, under the conditions that existed in that valley, the probability of that shot was high, she said. I told my CO the same thing. I know you did. I read his report. He moved back toward the table. That's why I wanted to meet you. Because what you did in that valley has direct implications for what I'm trying to do next. And I need to know if you're willing to hear what those implications are. She met his eyes. Tell me, she said. What he told her took 40 minutes and required her to restructure her understanding of the past 5 days completely. The intelligence compromise was real and was still active. The investigation had identified one node in the leak chain, but not the source, the equivalent of finding where a wire was cut, without yet knowing who had cut it. Fisk had information that could complete the picture, but accessing it required moving in a way that wouldn't alert whoever was still monitoring the intelligence channels. He needed someone who could operate outside the normal unit structure without raising flags. He needed someone with a specific combination of skills that wasn't common. And he needed someone who had already demonstrated the ability to perform under the exact kind of pressure this would involve. You're asking me to help you identify a mole? She said. I'm asking you to be part of a very small team that's going to try to close a gap in a compromised network before whoever is on the other end of it uses it to get more people killed. And you came to me because you shot a professional assassin at 600 meters in a crosswind from an improvised position while under active fire, he said. And because your record shows a consistent pattern of performing exactly what's needed without any requirement for recognition or acknowledgement. He paused. Because you're the person nobody sees coming, And in the current situation, that's the most valuable thing there is. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about Reeves, about Ethan in the surgical ward, about Okafor humming under his breath, about all of it, the team, the mission, the valley, the shot. She thought about the 37 seconds she had spent too many years calculating. Who else knows about this? She said. Hollis, he said. And Reeves as of this morning, no one else. Reeves agreed. He had conditions. What conditions? That you have the right to decline without any operational consequence. Fisk looked at her steadily. This is voluntary, Carter, completely. I want to be absolutely clear about that. She exhaled slowly. What's the timeline? She said. 72 hours to establish a position. After that, we move when the conditions are right. And the risk level? He didn't look away. High. She appreciated that he didn't dress it up. Okay, she said. He blinked. Just once, but she caught it, a small, involuntary response to an answer that had come faster than he expected. You don't need time to think about it. I already thought about it, she said. While you were talking. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was the closest thing to surprise she had seen on his face since she walked in. All right, he said. Then we start now. Reeves found her 2 hours later. She was in her workspace, which she had reorganized twice in the past hour, because reorganizing things was what she did when she was working through something internally and needed her hands occupied. He came in and leaned against the doorframe and looked at her with the expression she had started to recognize, the one that meant he had more information than he was going to lead with. Fisk told me the conversation went well, he said. It was informative. He also told me what he asked you. She stopped reorganizing and looked at him. I said yes, she said. I know. He crossed his arms. I want you to know that I meant what I said in the debrief. You have the absolute right to. I said yes because I meant yes, she said. Not because I felt pressured, and not because I didn't understand the risk. He was quiet for a moment. The operation is going to require you to operate outside your designated role again, he said. More formally this time. More significantly. What does that mean practically? It means I'm going to put some paperwork through that adjusts your operational parameters. Temporarily. So that what you're authorized to do matches what you're actually going to be doing. He paused. It should have happened already. I was slow on it. That's on me. She looked at him. Daniel, she said, using his first name for the first time deliberately because the moment called for it. You didn't know what you didn't know. That's different from not caring. Something shifted in his face. The line between his eyebrows eased slightly. The team is going to notice you're running different assignments, he said. Let them notice. Webb is going to have questions. Webb can ask them. He almost smiled. He probably will. Good. She turned back to her workspace and then stopped. One question, she said. Go ahead. The source Fisk was meeting. The one who died. She turned back to face him. Did Hollis's investigation identify who gave them up? The line between Reeves's eyebrows came back. Not yet, he said. But you have a theory. He was quiet long enough that the quiet itself was informative. Hollis has a theory, he said carefully, and you agree with it. I think it's worth investigating seriously. Who is it? He looked at her steadily. You'll be briefed when the time is right. She held his gaze. Is it someone on this team? She said. The silence was 3 seconds long, which was in the current context essentially an answer. Get some rest, he said. You're meeting with Hollis at 0500. He left. She stood in her workspace and felt the cold, specific weight of what that silence meant pressing against her from the inside. Someone on the team, not Webb. The investigation had cleared him. Not Okafor, his access level made it logistically impossible. Not any of the operators who had been on the Taraki mission, because the timing of the compromise predated several of their assignments, which left a short and very uncomfortable list. She thought about who had access to mission parameters, who had visibility into the intelligence chain, who had been in the unit long enough to build the kind of trusted position that made certain conversations and certain database queries unremarkable. She thought about the debriefs, the interviews, the investigators who had written things down and left without sharing anything in return. She thought about what Fisk had said, not necessarily the same as the whole picture. She sat down and stared at her workspace for a long moment. Then she opened her medical supply log and started an inventory count because her hands needed to be doing something, and because sometimes the best way to think clearly was to do something completely routine while your mind worked on the thing that wasn't. (0500) came cold and fast. Hollis was already in the briefing room when Olivia arrived, and so was a man Olivia hadn't seen before. Mid-40s civilian clothes, the specific quality of attentiveness that came from intelligence work or law enforcement, and was difficult to entirely disguise, regardless of what you were wearing. "Carter," Hollis said. "This is Agent Donovan. He's working the compromise investigation from the civilian side." Donovan nodded at her. "Sergeant Carter, I've read your after-action." "Seems like everyone has," she said. Something in his expression moved briefly toward amusement, and then settled back into professional neutral. "We're going to lay out the full picture for you this morning," Hollis said. "Everything we have. Because what we're asking you to do requires you to understand the complete context, and partial information creates operational risk we're not willing to accept." Olivia sat down. "Then give me the complete context," she said. What they gave her took 90 minutes. The intelligence compromise had begun approximately 7 months ago. It was traced not definitively, but with high probability to a specific personnel rotation that had brought new members into the intelligence processing chain serving the eastern sector. During those 7 months, 4 operations had gone wrong in ways that shared a consistent characteristic. They had been successful in outcome, but had encountered unexpected resistance that indicated advance warning. Taraki was the 5th. It was the first one that had gone from unexpected resistance to prepared assassination. "They escalated," Donovan said. "Something changed 7 months in. Something made the person running this willing to move from compromising missions to actively trying to kill the people on them." "What changed?" she said. Hollis and Donovan exchanged a brief look. "We believe Colonel Fisk's source communicated something specific approximately 3 months ago," Hollis said. "Something that if it reached the right people would close the network down completely. We think whoever is running the compromise became aware of that communication and decided that neutralizing the threat was more important than maintaining the operational cover they'd been protecting. The source was killed to prevent that information from being passed," Olivia said. "Yes, and the ambush in Taraki was designed to eliminate anyone the source might have communicated with," Donovan said, "including Fisk, including potentially anyone who might subsequently receive that information from Fisk." The full shape of it came clear. The ambush hadn't been random. The target had been specifically Fisk, and the unit had been the vehicle used to get him into the valley. "They used us to lure him in," she said. "Yes. Which means whoever set this up had access to mission planning." "Yes. And clearance level high enough to insert false intelligence into the tasking chain." "Yes." She thought about the short list she'd been working through the previous night. She thought about access and clearance and trust, and the specific way that institutional betrayal worked, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly in the spaces between ordinary moments, in the unremarkable transactions of daily work life that nobody thought twice about because why would they? "You have a name," she said. Hollis looked at her. "We have a strong probability," she said carefully. "Who?" Another exchanged look between Hollis and Donovan. Donovan leaned forward slightly. "Major Garrett Sims," he said. "Battalion Intelligence Coordination. He's been in place for 8 months. His access covers every channel that was compromised. And 3 days ago, when we fed a specifically designed false data point into a controlled channel that only he had visibility into, the enemy coordination cell that planned the Taraki ambush adjusted its posture in a way that directly reflected that data point. Sims. Olivia knew the name. She had seen it on paperwork, had been in 2 briefings where he was present. A careful man, methodical, the kind of person who never said more than was necessary, and listened more than he spoke, which she had at the time read as professional discipline. "He's still in position," she said. "Yes, because removing him before we close the network would alert whoever is running him that we're onto him, and we need that network to stay open long enough to trace it back to the source." "And that's where I come in," she said. "Fisk has a communication that needs to be passed through a specific channel," Hollis said. "A channel that Sims has access to, but the communication is it's constructed to trigger a specific response from the network on the other end, a response that will give us the final piece of the chain we need. And the risk is that Sims will recognize what's happening and move to neutralize it before the response comes," Donovan said. "Which means someone needs to be in a position to ensure that doesn't happen." She looked at both of them. "You need someone positioned to intercept him if he moves," she said. "We need someone who can be in the right place at the right time and make a judgment call under pressure without support and without a second option," Hollis said. "Someone whose presence in that context won't raise flags because their role already puts them in proximity to the people and locations involved. The medic that nobody looks twice at. The person who carries medical supplies instead of additional ammunition. The woman in the unit that a certain kind of man files in a box and labels and never looks at again." She thought about her father's voice, standing in a field in Montana, telling her that the most dangerous position was the one that nobody was watching. "I understand," she said. "You sure?" Donovan said. "Because once we start the clock on this, I understand," she said again. He nodded. Hollis opened a folder. "Then here's exactly what we need you to do." She had 24 hours. In that 24 hours, she treated 2 minor injuries, a sprained wrist and a tension headache that she suspected was more stress than physiological, ate 2 meals, slept 4 hours, and ran through the operational parameters Hollis had given her, until they were as natural and automatic in her mind as a wound assessment protocol. The operation was simple on its surface. Simple operations were often the most dangerous because the simplicity concealed the complexity of what had to go right for the simple version to work. Fisk would send the communication at 2100. The expected response window from the network was 30 to 60 minutes. Sims, if he was their man and if he recognized what was in the communication, would move within that window. Olivia needed to be positioned to see him move and to stop him from doing what he intended to do without causing a scene that would alert anyone else in the building or give him the opportunity to trigger any kind of deadman protocol. Simple. Okafor found her at 1800. He didn't know what was happening. He couldn't know because the operational security required it, but he had the particular sensitivity of someone who paid close attention to the people around him. And he had been paying attention to her for 24 hours, and something in what he observed had brought him to find her. "You okay?" he said. "Fine. That's what you always say." "Because it's always true." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Different question. Is there anything you need?" She thought about that. "No," she said, "but I appreciate you asking." He nodded, started to leave. "Yusuf," she said. He turned. "Whatever you see tonight," she said carefully. "Whatever happens, trust the chain of command. Don't react until someone tells you it's time to react." He looked at her for a long, careful moment. "Roger that," he said quietly. He left. She checked her watch. 2 hours and 47 minutes. She was ready. At 20:58, Olivia was in position. She had found a reason to be there that required no explanation and raised no flags of follow-up medical check on a communications technician who had reported a persistent headache 2 days running and whose workspace happened to be 40 meters from the intelligence coordination section where Garrett Sims worked late most evenings. The medical bag on her shoulder was real. The instruments inside it were real. The paperwork on the technician was real. Everything else she was carrying was invisible. At 2100 somewhere in a secured room 3 buildings over, Colonel Raymond Fisk sent the communication. Olivia knew the moment it went because she felt the shift in herself, the specific tightening of attention that happened when a clock she couldn't see started running. 30 to 60 minutes. That was the expected response window, which meant Sims, if Hollis and Donovan had their read right, would move sometime in that interval. She finished with the technician, documented the visit, packed her bag, and stepped into the corridor. She walked slowly. There was no reason to rush. A medic making evening rounds moved at the pace of someone doing routine work, because routine work didn't hurry. She turned the corner that gave her a sightline to the intelligence coordination section. Sims was at his desk. She clocked him in her peripheral vision without turning her head toward him, a skill she had developed over years of operating in environments where direct attention communicated intent, and she needed to observe without advertising that she was observing. He was working. Keyboard screen. The ordinary visual profile of someone processing data in the late evening. She found a reason to be in the corridor for another 4 minutes, a supply cabinet check that she did slowly and methodically, and then moved on. At 21:19 she was back. Sims was still at his desk, but something had changed. The quality of his stillness was different. She caught it in less than a second and filed it immediately. Not the posture of someone working, but the posture of someone waiting. Someone who had received information and was now making a decision about what to do with it. The response had come. She kept walking. Her pulse was elevated, and she managed it the way she always managed it, not by suppressing it, but by treating it as data, acknowledging it, and setting it aside. She went around the far end of the corridor, positioned herself in the medical supply alcove that gave her a partial sight line back through the connecting passage, and waited. At 2126, Sims stood up. He moved with a deliberateness that was its own kind of tell. Not the casual movement of someone going to get coffee or use the bathroom, but the focused economic movement of someone executing a decision they had already made. He picked up a folder from his desk. He tucked it under his arm. He walked toward the communications annex on the south end of the building. Olivia moved. She came out of the alcove and fell into the corridor behind him, 40 feet back, medical bag on her shoulder, pace steady. Not following walking. The distinction mattered because one read as surveillance and the other read as coincidence, and in a building full of people moving between rooms at various hours, coincidence was the safer interpretation for anyone who happened to observe it. Sims turned right. She turned right. He went through the door to the secondary communications room, a space used for overflow processing, less trafficked in the evening. The kind of place where someone might go to use a terminal with reduced monitoring. The door closed behind him. She was 12 feet away. She stopped. Her hand was on her medical bag. She thought about Hollis's briefing. About the specific window once Sims accessed the secondary terminal, he would have approximately 4 minutes before the communication he was attempting to send would reach its destination, at which point the network on the other end would execute a shutdown protocol that would destroy the evidence trail Fisk had worked months to construct. 4 minutes. She pushed through the door. Sims was at the terminal, his back to her, the folder open on the desk beside him. He didn't hear her come in. The HVAC system in the room was loud enough to mask the door, which was why she had timed her entry the way she had. She was 6 feet from him before he turned. The expression on his face when he saw her moved through 3 distinct phases in less than a second. Surprise, recognition. Then the particular cold recalibration of someone who understood immediately that the situation had changed and was already processing what that meant. "Sergeant Carter," he said. Even. Controlled. "Major Sims." She set her medical bag on the desk beside the door without looking away from him. "You left something in the main office." His eyes moved to the bag. To her face. Back to the terminal screen, which was currently displaying a drafting interface with a partially composed message. "I don't think that's why you're here," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." The calculation behind his eyes was visible. She was watching for it and she saw it clearly. He was running the same kind of assessment she would have run in his position. Who sent her? What she knew? What his options were? "How much did they tell you?" he said. "Enough. Did they tell you I've been at this for 8 months, that I've built something that took years to construct from the other side, that what I'm trying to send right now would destroy a network that's been killing American soldiers?" she said. "I know what you believe you're doing." Something in his expression shifted. The calculation paused. "Then you understand why I can't let you stop me," he said. "I understand why you think that," she said. "I don't agree with it." He moved, not toward her, toward the terminal, the fastest path to completing what he'd started, because he had done the same assessment she had, and arrived at the same conclusion: the terminal was the objective. She was between him and it, in less time than he expected. That surprised him. She saw it, the fractional hesitation when his path was blocked by someone who had moved faster than the mental model he had of who she was allowed for. "You're a medic," he said. "People keep saying that," she said. "It keeps being less true than they think." He stopped, 4 feet from her, the terminal behind her right shoulder. The room was very quiet except for the HVAC system. "Carter." His voice had changed, less controlled now, something real pushing through the professional surface. "I've been watching this network operate for 8 months. I know who's running it. I know the full chain. If I don't send this right now tonight, that information goes dark forever. Do you understand what I'm saying? The people who have been setting up operations like Taraki, like the ambush that almost killed your whole team, they walk away clean." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "Then step aside." "No, Carter. Because that's not the only way to close this," she said. "And because the way you're trying to do it burns the legal case that has to come after. You send that, right now you destroy the chain of custody on everything Fisk has built. Whatever happens to the network, the people who ran it never see a courtroom. They disappear and they rebuild somewhere else, and 18 months from now, there's another Taraki." The silence stretched. She watched his face. Something was working behind his eyes, the complicated collision of conviction and doubt of certainty, meeting the possibility that the argument against him was not simply procedural, but actually right. "Fisk has another way," she said. "That's what tonight was about. Not catching you. Showing you what the complete case looks like before you make a decision you can't take back." He stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "Step away from the terminal," she said, "and I'll show you." Another silence. Longer this time. She didn't move, didn't push. She had learned from her father that pressure in the critical moment was often the thing that broke the possibility of the right outcome. Sometimes you made your case, and then you waited, and the waiting was its own argument. Sims looked at the terminal screen. Then he stepped back. She let out one slow breath. "Thank you," she said. She had Hollis on the radio within 40 seconds. "He stepped back from the terminal," she said. "He's willing to talk. You need to be here now." Hollis arrived in 3 minutes with Donovan and Fisk. Sims was sitting against the far wall with his arms on his knees, and the expression of a man who had been running at full speed for 8 months and had just for the first time stopped moving. Fisk looked at him for a moment. Then he pulled a chair around and sat down directly across from him. Closed the kind of proximity that was either confrontational or human, depending on the intent behind it, and Fisk made it human. "Garrett," he said, "not Major Sims. Garrett." Sims looked up. "Talk to me," Fisk said. From the beginning. What came out over the next hour was not a confession in the formal sense. It was something more complicated and more human than that, the account of a man who had made one decision 8 months ago that he believed was the right decision, and had then spent every subsequent day maintaining the architecture of that decision while watching it grow into something he hadn't intended and couldn't fully control. Sims had not set out to betray his unit. He had set out to dismantle a network from the inside a plan he had constructed and executed without authorization, because he had determined correctly that the authorized channels were too slow and too compromised to achieve the objective in time. The problem was that working inside a hostile network without authorization required feeding that network real information to maintain credibility. And real information had consequences that he had convinced himself he could manage and had not in the end been able to manage. Taraki had not been his design, but he had provided the mission parameters that made it possible. "I didn't know they were going to try to kill the team," he said. His voice had the rough quality of someone speaking a truth they had been carrying alone for too long. "I thought they were going to intercept and redirect, create a delay, buy time." "But you knew something was going to happen to us," Olivia said from across the room. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. The word sat there. She held his gaze and did not look away, and she let him hold the weight of that without offering him the relief of a reaction. "Ethan Brooks almost lost his arm," she said, "because of information you passed." "I know. Say it like you know it." He flinched. Then quietly, "Sergeant Brooks almost lost his arm because of information I passed to a hostile network. That's on me." She nodded once. Fisk looked at her briefly, something in his expression that might have been respect, and then turned back to Sims. "The network source," he said. "The full chain. Can you reconstruct it from memory?" "I spent 8 months memorizing it," Sims said.